Before we get started, take a second to think about this past week. Think of a moment when maybe no one else noticed, but you handled a situation better than you normally would. Maybe you didn't spiral after a mistake, you stayed composed, maybe you showed up when you really didn't feel like it. That's the work most people never see, but it's what drives everything that shows up on the outside. That's building your inner scoreboard, and that's what we're focused on here. Welcome to episode 3, You Are Not Your Performance. We've all been taught directly or indirectly that how we perform is who we are. Play well, you feel good about yourself. Have a bad game, miss a shot, lose a match, don't reach the goal, and the story becomes, I'm not good enough, I suck, I don't belong here. Well, your performance is not your identity. It never was, but it can start to feel that way if you're not paying attention. For most athletes, and honestly for most people, this is how they live their lives. But when performance becomes your identity, everything gets heavier. Every shift matters more, every mistake feels bigger, every result feels personal. And when that happens, you just stop competing and you start protecting your reputation, protecting your role, protecting how people see you. And in doing that, you stop playing freely. You stop taking risks. You stop pushing your limits. You don't perform better, you perform safer. Safe doesn't win. Safe doesn't grow. Safe keeps you stuck in the suck. So sometimes when I'm sitting with an athlete, they may say something along the lines of, I feel like I'm not good enough. So my response typically is, tell me more about that or tell me what's happened. I'm always looking for context, and I'm also listening for something deeper. Are they talking about what they did, or are they talking about who they are? Because those are two very different things. And most people don't pay attention when that shift happens. Most of the time, the conversation actually shifts quickly from, I had a bad game, and it turns into, I'm not good enough. So did you notice the shift? I had a bad game, which is performance, and it shifted to, I'm not good enough, which is identity and core beliefs. And that's where things get dangerous, because once it becomes identity, it's no longer something you can just fix with a better performance. Now, some may argue that I'm not good enough is a performance statement as well. That's a fair comment. Sometimes it is. If the assessment is actually accurate, that's one thing. Maybe the person actually is not good enough to be on that team, to lead the league in points, or whatever the metric is. If so, then we're having a different conversation about setting realistic goals and having realistic expectations. But that's not what I'm talking about here. What I'm referring to is the person who loses their sense of self as a result of that poor performance. So I've seen this a lot in coaching. Player who's always been, that guy or that girl, they're the top line, top performer. They produce in key moments. They're the ones that you call upon. And then something changes. Maybe the competition gets better. Maybe confidence dips. Maybe they hit a stretch where nothing is going in. They're just in a slump. And suddenly everything tightens up. They stop making plays they used to make easily. They start forcing things. They start playing to not mess up or not make mistakes. But sometimes the biggest change is in their language. I'm not that player anymore. I suck. I don't belong here. Nothing magically changed overnight in their ability. What changed is how they see themselves. Same player, same ability, but different sense of identity. So when someone says to me, I'm not good enough, that's not a performance evaluation. That's a core belief. And core beliefs don't change just because you have a good game next time. There's a difference between I didn't perform well and I'm no good. One is situational, the other is identity. So, why do we tie identity to performance? Well, because somewhere along the way, we learn that performance equals worth. You got praised when you played well, you were recognized, rewarded, validated, and that's not always a bad thing. But over time, it teaches you something. If I perform well, then I matter. If I don't perform well, maybe I don't matter. So you don't just chase performance, you start to depend upon it. And when that happens, you don't just fear losing, you fear what losing means about you. And that's where the pressure really comes from, not the game, but what the game represents. So we can think about early sport experiences. So there's a player who dominates, scores lots of goals, they get the attention. When young players visit with family, questions are often, did you win? How many goals did you get? Then the good performance outcomes like goals and wins are rewarded with gifts like money and ice cream. Oh, I'll give you $1 for every goal you score. We can go for ice cream if you win or if you hit the double. So the final outcome equals the performance measure, which equals positive reinforcement. Then there's the player who struggles or just doesn't score. They definitely don't get the positive attention or the positive reinforcement. So what about the kid who won the faceoff that led to that goal? What about the defensive lineman who makes a great block to create a gap and then the running back can run the ball in to get a touchdown? No money, no reward, no ice cream. Even though they did something meaningful, it wasn't reinforced because they didn't get the points. No recognition of process, just outcomes. Then when they make a mistake or have an average performance, they either don't get praised or it gets highlighted as something they did wrong. Even at the higher levels, better performance equals more playing time, more recognition, more opportunity. In pro sports, it equals more money. And all of those things reinforce the same belief that performance equals value. So it's not surprising that athletes start to believe that if I don't produce, I don't matter. So what's the cost of all this? When your identity is tied to performance, your self-worth becomes conditional. You play well, you feel good about yourself. You struggle, you question who you are. And that creates a really fragile system because now every shift, every game, every mistake isn't just about performance, it's about identity. You start organizing behavior around protecting that identity. So you play safer, avoid mistakes, stop taking risks. You might even avoid situations entirely. So you might avoid going to tryouts or new opportunities or playing with higher level team. Because if you don't succeed there, what does that say about you? And just like failure in trying to protect yourself, you actually limit your growth. You don't just lose confidence, you lose a sense of self. So one of the simplest but most powerful shifts I work on with athletes is language. Moving from I'm terrible to I didn't play well. That's not semantics, that's structure. One fuses identity and performance. I am terrible. And the other, I didn't play well, separates identity and performance. And that separation is critical because if you are your performance, you'll always be fragile. But if you do your performance, you can struggle and still be stable. You can have a bad day without becoming a bad player or feeling like you're a bad person. If I slow this down in a session, client says, I'm terrible. I suck. So I'm going to ask for more information about what's going on. And the conversation often shifts from that one poor performance to compounding incidents of not being good enough. And that's a very different conversation. I might say something along the lines of, I don't think this is specifically about performance. I think this is about how you see yourself. And if we took performance out of it completely, what's left? That's a bit of a mic drop moment for clients sometimes because most athletes struggle there because they've never had to answer a question like that before. For the first time, they're being asked who they are without their sport or without their performance. Here's what most people don't realize. When your identity is on the line, you don't perform better. You perform tighter and you start quitting. And the quitting is not a physical quit. It's mental. It's constricting, overthinking, hesitating, second guessing. Because now every moment feels like a test, not of your skill, but of your worth. And when everything feels like a test, you stop playing to win and start playing to not fail. I spoke a little bit about this in the last episode. The player that makes a mistake and then sits on the bench with their shoulders slouched and their head hanging low. Next shift, no jump, no confidence, really not engaged. They're not reacting anymore. They're thinking, they're trying not to mess up again. It's shifting from no longer I had a bad shift to I'm a bad person. I'm a bad player. It's the same player, different mindset, different performance. So what does it actually look like to not tie identity to performance? It's not that you stop caring. That's just crazy talk. Because if you stop caring, you stop playing. It's all about relating differently to the process and the outcomes. It's creating separation. You still want to perform well. You still compete. You still push your limits. But your self-worth doesn't rise and fall with the outcome. You can have a bad game and not question who you are as a person. You can struggle and still show up the next day the same way. Separation doesn't lower your standards. It stabilizes them. So instead of saying, I'm awful, shift to, I didn't play well today, or I didn't reach my goal today. Then return to the growth mindset of how to learn from the experience. Same performance, different meaning, different long-term outcomes. It's a bit cliche, but thinking along the lines of, it's not losing, it's learning. The drive home after a game for some players is absolutely exhausting. And some of them dread that conversation, or for some, it's actually an interrogation by their parents. Some of these things can be reinforced in these moments. So for my guys, I try to use the strategy of what's one thing you did well and one thing you need to work on. This isn't necessarily tied to a specific goal or a specific play, but about the game overall. And sometimes after really tough games, they can't always think of something they did well. So in those moments, I try to find one for them. I generally try not to pile on the bad stuff unless they ask for my opinion, then I'm going to share it with them. Now, I'm a parent before I'm a psychotherapist and before I'm a coach, and I mess this stuff up too. But it's about your overall habits. So I can remember a game as recent as this last season where one of my sons was upset about losing ice time in a game. I still very much had my coach hat on, and I said to him, well, you have to work harder to give them a reason to play you. And that was a total parenting fail. In that situation, he was talking to me as a child talking to a parent, and I totally missed the mark. What I should have done was validated his feelings at the time, and I could have also reinforced that the coach's opinion and decision about the loss of playing time doesn't define my son as a person. But I didn't do that. I took the wrong approach and failed in that moment. But what's most important is in that I didn't let that moment define me as a parent, and it didn't define my relationship with my son. How I responded after that That helps shape the kind of parent that I want to be. So this isn't just a sport or athlete problem, it's a human problem. So although my example of the drive home is sports related because it happened after a game and it was related to performance in a game, it's really, if we're talking about my son, but we focus on my role in that, it's a parenting example. I made a mistake. I could have defaulted to I'm a bad parent, but I didn't. Instead, I reevaluated my performance as a parent in that situation. I realized that I made a mistake and I took steps to learn from that situation. So the first thing I did after that was I apologized to my son. And now I make efforts to not repeat that mistake. True contrition is acknowledging the mistake and then changing behavior. Just saying I'm sorry is not really an apology. It doesn't, you need to change behavior to demonstrate that you mean it. So when a similar situation happens in the future, I'm hopeful and I believe that I'll handle it better. So in fact, my performance as a parent is improving. That's the shift from judgment to growth. In relationships, if having an argument in a relationship defines you as a bad partner, you'll either shut down or you'll avoid conflict, or you might avoid relationships altogether. That's not a healthy approach at all. Instead, acknowledge the poor performance in that moment and use it as a catalyst for change, whether it's in your relationship or in yourself as a person. At work, maybe you don't get a promotion that you applied for. It doesn't mean that you're bad at your job or that you're a bad person. If you link it in that way, you may avoid trying for promotions in the future. Or even worse, you may give up on your job. That leads to a worse performance, which may lead to actually losing your job. All of this will reinforce your initial incorrect thought. Instead, ask for feedback. Maybe you actually aren't very good at your job. And knowing this will motivate you to look for something different. Or maybe it wasn't about you at all. You were exceptionally qualified, but there just happened to be someone else more qualified. This can happen in sport too, because no matter how talented you are, there may be others who are more talented, whether it's that season, that week, that league, or just on that specific day. One instance does not define you. These are all different arenas, but the same patterns. When identity is tied to performance, you stop taking risks. And when you stop taking risks, you stop growing. One outcome becomes a story, and that story becomes your identity if you let it. So here's the shift I want you to make. I think it's okay to evaluate your performance and ask yourself if you've performed well. In fact, I think you should evaluate your performance. From there, evaluate what went well so you can try to replicate it, and explore what didn't go well so you can learn from it and make change. That is a growth mindset. Ask yourself, does that performance define me? If the answer is yes, you'll always be riding a roller coaster. Up when things go well, down when they don't go well. But if you separate the two, you become more stable, more consistent, and ironically, you perform better because you're finally free to compete instead of trying to prove something. You are a person first and an athlete second. Performance is a process and an outcome. It's something you produce, not something you are. The next time you have a bad game, miss a shot, fall short of your expectations, whatever it is, pause and ask yourself, am I evaluating my performance or my identity? One helps you grow, and the other keeps you stuck in the suck. That event does not define you, and that distinction changes everything. This is the Inner Scoreboard podcast, where performance, identity, and mental health meet. If this episode resonated with you at all, share it with someone who needs the reminder you are not your performance. If there's a topic you'd like me to cover in the future, please reach out through my website, paulbrowncoaching.com. You can also follow me on Instagram at Paul Brown Coaching and check out my YouTube channel, Paul Brown Coaching. Thanks for joining, and I'll catch you next time.